welcome to this Sattology Debunking Mythology show. And today is a very special show. I'm doing it from the Washington DC, so I don't have all the studio facilities today. But I have a very special guest who has come back after a very long time. And if you recall, many of you must have seen his videos. And His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj. If you recall, that he was the first person to say on his own, Sattology looks like science of truth. So he's back again today with very kindness. And then there is also another update on the Sattology that we really appreciate your support to us and also making us reach to a larger audience because of you are telling everyone to subscribe. So this show is going to be in English and Hindi. So keep watching. Uh, the another aspect, another thing which I would like to share with you that and I'll cover that in a separate video is that one of my book has been widely spoken, transcending the mind, has been in the devotee in the political circle in the US, and I'll share with you that good news a little bit shared later actually, and especially on the International Yoga Day. I got very wild reviews of good reviews of that book on that book. So without delay, let us welcome our guest, His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So Maharaj, times are changing, and welcome back to the show after a long time.
Thank
And
you.
and during the months that we were not there, you're not in the show, the channel has really grown much bigger than what it was that time. So all because of your blessings. So thank you, Maharaj. I have one question to you, and it's a general question. I know you don't speak on political matters, or probably you don't keep track of anything political. So, but I have a general question. There are a lot of people who pose as very Brahmana or a Kavi, and they misrepresent the complete historical writings of Ramayana without any shame or without any even references also. They miss
Mhm.
out. And then they claim that no, they were representing and they lie also. So how to address these kind of issues, because it has been happening very frequently.
Well, thank you, first of all, Aditya. It is a great pleasure to be back with you on this channel. If I remember right, some of the sessions we had done were on law of karma and Lord Ram and so on. So this is just, I'm told, a free-flowing chat. So that's also nice. And so to come to your question, um, well, in one sense, the holy books, especially the itihasas like Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the other kind of narrations mentioned in the scriptures, in the Vedic scriptures, are meant for everybody, and yet they are not meant for everybody. They are meant for everybody in the sense that everybody can take advantage of what is taught or spoken in these great epics. There's much to learn from these epics. There's a lot of purification of the heart that can be attained as a result of that. So there is no discrimination in terms of who can access them in terms of one's birth or one's, linguistic background or whatever. However, one thing that is necessary to access these books is faith, and faithful representation and faithful dissemination from authorized sources. It is not right to, in the name of creative license, present all sorts of distorted views or distorted representations of scriptural themes, uh, like the Mahabharata or Bhagavatam or any other such scripture. So, because this is, well, entertainment is all right, but when it comes to such themes, the entertainment must be also circumscribed by certain norms, because we're dealing with something quite holy, something sacred, and therefore the gravity, the dignity, the sanctity, the purity of the message and the narrative or the narration must be maintained. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that the real method of presenting such things is through the eyes of faith, and then you can have creativity there, ingenuity, there's no problem. But it should not end up defeating the very purpose of the text which we are depicting, whether it's in literary form or online or in the visual media and so on. You asked me a general question, so I've answered it in a very general way, Aditya. I hope
No,
that addresses what you were asking.
yeah, because you said you stay away from all these or you don't follow them, but the person's name is Manoj Muntasher Shukla, and he's the one who is known as a very famous poet. And I even doubt such kind of credentials also, because in Gita, Krishna says that Kavim Purana Manushasitara Manoranyam Saraswati. So I don't know who is a Kavi nowadays, because most of the Kavis nowadays create very mundane kind of poems. So the important question is, like, from when we want to address English speaking and the English speaking audience, sometimes the charisma of the Bollywood takes over, and a person who was acting over there is also a Bollywood actor known as Saif Ali Khan. And he was saying that, and I know his knowledge of history is same as Jawaharlal Nehru, Bharat Ek Khoj, and he created his own Khoj, and he wanted to present Ravan in a good light. And so his idea about this movie was, he's the main villain in the movie, to present Ravan in a good light. And maybe the due to association, Manoj Muntashi and all these people, they got carried away. The Bollywood is always the negative force, and he was trying to do something good, but anyway, the outcome is disaster, and the movie is a complete flop. So, from your perspective, because these people have made, uh, I have a lot of respect for you, and like many people like me, but the respect for sadhus have gone down because of all these movies and constant caricature of a of a Hindu saint as a comedy character. So, what do you like to say on that?
Well, as I said, a creative license uh, is acceptable provided it is within certain limits, with recognition of the topic of the sanctity of the topic that is being discussed. Generally, entertainment even earlier on, say some decades ago even, had some boundaries. But it appears that today, in the name of entertainment, anything goes. So I haven't seen this particular film that you're referring to, uh, but the trend that is visible in the last many years is that it is okay to be highly irreverential about anything and everything. So, all right, we do have the freedom to disbelieve or believe in anything, including any religious themes or religious texts. At the same time, I think uh, to do it in a way that may denigrate or demean, uh, you know, what is presented in the scriptures or even scriptural concepts and personalities, whether they are saints or whether they are, the different avatars of God, for example, or religious ideas and concepts, I think is not a very nice thing to do. And somehow the other, because we are living in a world where free speech is a kind of a coveted and promoted value, so people take undue advantage of that. And one of the reasons for that is uh, that the Vedic tradition has not found adequate, shall we say, um, authentic dissemination channels. The kind of teaching that is required for people who are to understand the concepts, and so they develop the faith with knowledge. That is perhaps lacking, and that is the need uh, in the current times. So people make statements because they may claim that they have faith, but they don't have knowledge. And therefore, without that knowledge, without that proper understanding received through the proper succession of saintly personalities, when we try to interpret Ramayana or Mahabharata or Bhagavatam or various spiritual concepts according to our own whims in a frivolous way, thinking that we are, going to be more reaching out and relate better to people in the name of, we are pandering the lower kind of sentiments of people, the lower tastes of people, and we try to present spiritual themes to the lowest common denominator without keeping in mind the values and the boundaries involved. So indeed, there is no problem in reaching out to the lowest common denominator, in the sense that even people who have absolutely no understanding of spirituality, it is nice to reach out to them with the spiritual message, even if it is in the form of entertainment. However, it should be done, as I said earlier, and I repeat, keeping the sanctity of the theme and the personalities involved intact.
Because this thing has hurt many people across in the US also, and other places of the world, because I can see reports coming out from everywhere. Now, one question comes in. Usually, an unsuspecting Hindu person, like maybe a religious person, is used as a front for doing such kind of activities. So they say, okay, Hindus are doing it, but the brain behind is somebody else. And because people don't read Shastra effectively, like you correctly said, that people do not go follow the parampara and don't read properly. So generally what happens is, at the end of the day, is that they end up mispromoting their culture or unpromoting their culture in the hope of gaining or doing something good for the society. So, so how can people avoid such kind of influences? Because they get used up in any way. So now Manoj is also trying to say everyone that I've been used, but it's not used. He did deliberately, and the end result is a disaster. Now probably nobody's going to read his poems now going forward.
Well, there are two possibilities. One may be ill motivated, or one may be uh, genuinely motivated for a particular cause. Now, even if one is genuinely motivated, but if one is misguided, or one does not have the guidance of spiritually knowledgeable people, then one could end up, misrepresenting spiritual themes. So I don't know which category this gentleman you mentioned falls in, whether he's deliberately doing it, whether he's malicious in his intentions, or whether he is just, probably properly motivated, but he doesn't understand how to do it. It's ill-conceived or he's misguided or something like that. So I don't know which of the two.
No, no, definitely he is all of the above, all of the above, all of the above. And the most funny thing is, all the so-called BJP governments in many states across India, they all supported him. The BJP governments and the RSS, and from the ISKCON, I saw Amog Leela Prabhu doing a very good video countering it. So in that way, I can see there are some elements of opposition there from other places also, but the Hindu governments all over the country, they supported him, and now they're repenting. In many places, I think his movies are being withdrawn also. Next question comes in now, other than this issue, because audience is maybe listening to this issue and they've already heard enough. So the next topic. So when the Indian Prime Minister, which is in US right now, and has done a tremendous work in promoting Indian culture and talking about Veda, talking about other things to the president, and even he quoted Veda in the U.S. Congress also, and he said and he told about how Indian philosophy and India being the oldest Lokatantra uh, in the world, not democracy but oldest Lokatantra. So there is also, we see a section of politicians who represent India properly. Very good way to represent India in a very powerful way and also in a non-threatening way. So, what do you say about this incident happening in the US also, and what do you feel about it?
You mean the way the Prime Minister of India, Mr.
As
Modi, has
represented the Vedic culture
represented
in the USA?
Vedic culture? Well, I did see, I do sometimes, I mean, I go through the news sometimes, so uh, I did see glimpses of that, and from whatever I heard, I didn't, it seemed quite all right, it seemed nice. I heard one speech we spoke in English, and then another one he spoke in Hindi, and of course, he spoke as any prime minister would be expected to speak. Um, so I think that he has done a fairly decent job in terms of presenting the culture, as far as I could see. Um, Even in terms of some of the ideas he presented and so on. I missed the part about the oldest Lokatantra or the oldest democracy part. Uh, so I think he's done a good job.
So, from a sadhu perspective, from a parampara perspective, what do you what would you have asked from a political leader of India how to represent their culture abroad? What will be your expectation?
Well, I think first of all, a person who follows these things in his life, who understands the philosophy of proper spiritual practices, and who then presents it like that in a way uh, that is seen as non-sectarian, as seen as being, uh, you know, uh, truly enlightening, not something that is parochial. And I think he has, whatever little I heard, I think he has pitched it right in terms of talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world being one family. And I heard him briefly speak about yoga, where he talked about yoga as being something universal, and also that India wasn't going after intellectual property rights and patents and royalties for yoga, uh, you know, in a world that is very selfishly obsessed with gaining commercial advantage out of anything and everything. Uh, so he is not, at least as yet, pitching for India to get commercial benefit from that. But he is indeed asking for something reasonable, that the world acknowledges that yoga, which is becoming very popular world over, indeed has its origins in India, that it's an age old culture. Of course, it's another matter to talk about what real yoga is, and that yoga is not merely exercises and so on. And that's a topic for a philosophical discussion. But I think overall, in trying to present a culture of yoga and Ayurveda, and presenting ideas like, the sheer broad width, the universalism that is inherent in Vedic philosophy in terms of its inclusiveness, in terms of the spiritual vision. To some degree, I think that he has mentioned these things. Although obviously, as a political leader, he will have to talk about politics, economics, and whatever else, military things, and so on. But I think he has made some mentions of culture, and I see even little things when he gives gifts to other heads of state and so on. There's always that strong cultural element in that, and that's something I have noticed. That's perhaps a good thing.
No, actually, you're right, and I am surprised you observed so many things here. But it has been like I'm in DC and I'm seeing the whole festival of India. Like everywhere, flags are there. There are people doing cultural activities, cultural dances, and from every part of India, Telangana, Tamil, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, and everywhere people are doing it. Karnataka, and it's a great feeling to be there. And I also saw some people who are and even the ISKCON was represented there. Anutama Prabhu was there. Anutama Das was also there walking around, and he was in the White House also. I saw him. So there were representation from everywhere, including some Muslim groups also in the Indian American delegation. Now uh, the question one comes in when we do an identity, and I know where you come from, where from the point of the Bhagavad Gita and Atma as an identity. But sometimes the physical identity of being an Indian or a body form like an Indian also plays a very important role in conveying a message of yoga, peace, and happiness to other communities. Because what I am feeling here nowadays is that Indians are gradually being seen more as a constructive society as compared to a destructive society, and therefore being a being an Indian is a proud statement. Like earlier, people used to hide their thing. Oh, I'm not a Hindu. I'm not an Indian. Now I have never done that. I've always said I'm a 100% gold standard Indian. But uh, now I see more and more people like that. So, do you think the image has changed and therefore everything is being happening, or how do you see this situation as now today?
Well, the question of identity is a very complex and fraught issue nowadays, as we all know. And we, as spiritual practitioners, have to straddle both worlds, the worlds of spiritual identity and the world of bodily identity. And both are relevant in their respective ways. Ultimately, it is the spiritual identity that should prevail in terms of one's consciousness. And this is the fundamental teaching that we are spirit souls and etc. So that the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic teachings are very clear on that. At the same time, the Vedic scriptures, talk about how one should live within this world. So the scriptures are not oblivious of the practical realities of day-to-day life. So they also prescribe many ways in which one should live, what one should do, what one should not do, and accordingly, then one presents oneself in a certain way. So, therefore, even though we, as devotees of Lord Krishna, for example, understand that we are the soul, we are not this body, but when we exist in the world, we do present our body in a certain way. For example, we have a tilak and we wear these neck beads made of tulsi. And me as a monk, let's say I dress in a certain way that makes our identity very evident. So we are, by our appearance and by our words, by our actions, conveying a certain message of identity to the world. So, in that sense, we straddle both. But even this is a spiritual identity, and there could be other practical identities which are required in a larger sense. For example, what kind of passport do you have, and what kind of appearance do you look like a Caucasian or a brown or a black or whatever, you know? So generally, people would think or would imagine that a person from India would be more aware of spiritual knowledge. And what I have seen is that even among devotee circles, when you come from an Indian background, they would always give more respect because they think that an Indian, having been born in that situation and kind of is naturally in the blood, so to speak, so that person would be, let's say, more accomplished or more bona fide or more genuine. Although, of course, we recognize that the physical birth is not really the criterion for spiritual advancement. Anybody born in any land, in any body, kind of body, black, white, whatever, has equal opportunity for making advancement in spiritual life. But this conception does exist. So we are living in a complicated world where each of us wears many hats and we have multiple identities. At the spiritual level and even at the bodily level, we have these identities. For example, Aditya, yourself, let's say, uh, you are at a spiritual level, you understand that you are the Atma, the soul, and that you are beyond the body. At the same time, you also have multiple bodily identities. You would identify in terms of religion as a Hindu, as a Vaishnava Hindu. You would identify in terms of your body as being from an Indian background. I don't know if you have an American passport. I presume you do. So then you would identify yourself as an American Indian or, as an American national, So like that, you identify yourself as a male, as an adult, so we wear so many hats, we have so many identities. So we live together in a world of intertwining identities, and we have to straddle these worlds very, shall we say, diligently. Does that answer your question, Aditya?
Yes, it does answer the question a little bit, and also it also gives a guide to the, because we cannot answer all the questions in 30-minute session or 40-minute session. We can have people have to go and deep into research and find out themselves, you know. And the today's youth, I'm talking about youth because we work with the youth a lot. Indian youth is very active youth, and the social media is filled up with the content from the Indian youth, which is making waves all over the world. So India has not been, and I'll say it uh, without any hesitation, that India has created one of the best users in the world of technology. We have not contributed in the world enough by creating Instagrams or Facebook or the platforms itself, because the whole ecosystem of building a platforms don't exist in India, like an app store or a Google store. And those anyone who is listening to my show, and they can make take up the challenge and do something about it. Now, but they're excellent users there. Like they will create Instagram and Reels and Facebook Reels, so many Reels, Maharaj, that it is literally time wastage. So we have created the best users who can use the technology to the best they can. But in the youth section, the question is, in the youth section, the importance of representing or creating a self identity and representing themselves with an Indian identity is completely missing. So through social media, they adopt different identities, but they don't represent their own identity. So when they go in the international forum, so they are always looking to seek validation from the West. So how you can stop that in the youth also today?
I think as devotees and as followers of the devotional Vedic tradition, mm, we should not hesitate to identify ourselves as such. And obviously, it means that we have to align ourselves with what this culture stands for, and that's important. It is a fact that the modern day culture, the materialistic and say the westernized model of culture, is sweeping the world, whether it is music, it's dress, whether it's value systems and teaching methodologies, or everything and everything is just sweeping across the world. So it is very important that we are rooted deeply in our cultural and spiritual values. That is important. Otherwise, we would be like um, a small boat out at sea that is at the mercy of big waves, and we get knocked about here and there. If we don't have the anchor of proper spiritual and cultural moorings, values, then we will just get swept away by the ever changing tides of contemporary fashions and thoughts and ideas. And fashions, by fashions, I don't mean only the fashions about clothing, but it's also fashions about how we think, the kinds of um, lifestyles we have, the kind of attitudes we have, the language we use, and so on and so forth. So I think it is very important to be culturally and spiritually rooted properly. Otherwise, we will never be able to be successful in our spiritual life. Spiritual activities cannot exist in a vacuum. Spiritual activities are founded on or enveloped by or sustained by a certain culture. And that culture has been going on for millennia. And we take all those elements of the culture that are favorable for our devotional practices, that are conducive towards the development of a harmonious society where people will live together for developing their higher nature rather than making their lower base natures more prominent. So this is where culture comes in, and especially for the youth, it is even more so because uh, the way the internet culture is right now, whether it's the movies or it's just overall this whole Instagram and whatever else that they have, um, I think that we really need to establish the need, the necessity, the importance of being properly spiritually and culturally rooted and not become There's an English word for it called deracinated. Deracinated means to be culturally, religiously, and spiritually uprooted. And then we're just like little straws in the wind that'll get sometimes blown this way, sometimes blown that way, depending on which way and the currents of modern, thought flow. Whimsically, we'll just be tossed around like that without any moorings. Life has a purpose. Life is not meaningless. And if life has a purpose, then there must be a direction, a proper way to attain that. And because it is not possible to attain it just in one night, it is a process that is has to be cultivated throughout one's life. It has to be painstakingly, laboriously, sincerely, and faithfully cultivated. So that needs a whole environment, a favorable, conducive environment, and that is what we call culture.
Nice way to put it. Very well put it. The one of the examples I'll give, the many of the ISRO scientists and also the NASA scientists are are deeply, there's a train horn in the back, are
Yeah,
deeply uh, culturally aware, like the deeply religious people, and they are the best scientists in the world, and they create technologies and rockets. But if you look at from the Shastra point of view, you know, you cannot go to a moon in a physical rocket. I have studied Mahabharata extensively, and in many parts of Mahabharata, Shukdev Goswami, when he travels to Surya planet, he travels with the mercy of Mahadev, and it is a very nice story there in Harivansh. You can check it out. When Shukdev Goswami was born, Vyasadeva had prayed to Mahadev to get a blessing, a son like himself, and therefore the Shukdev Goswami came. But the path of ascension of Shukdev Goswami, how he passes the earth, is way different than the globe people talk about. So even the modern scientists are, I think they're lacking information somewhere. But still, I see one good thing is that most of them appear to be very religious, but still not backed by the conclusions of the scriptures actually. So what do you have to say on that?
modern science operates on the physical dimension. And we understand from the scriptures that even the physical dimension on which modern science operates is a very small portion of that physical dimension. That physical dimension, which is observable or accessible to our senses or to the extension of our senses, like the instruments and so on. Or we even induce and deduce so many things. We infer so many things based on the data that our senses receive through all these instruments. So, from the scriptures, we understand that only a very small portion of the material creation is available for observation to those whose consciousness is impure. You see, when the consciousness becomes very pure and spiritualized, it gives us access into realms of existence, even in the material creation, that are not otherwise available or accessible to one. So, there are vast worlds even within our world, our material world. What to speak of the spiritual world? That's a different subject altogether. That is completely inaccessible to the physical eye and to the materialistic approach. But even the material world is also not fully accessible to us. There are many realms, there are many dimensions that we cannot access. So, you see, if we have scientists who are going about their job, trying to go from one planet to another planet by physical means. Okay, so they're doing it under the process that has been understood and defined and developed by modern science. So that's one part of it. Uh, so there is the physical part of the planets that we see, the observable universe. But from the Bhagavatam and other scriptures, we do understand that there is a subtler dimension to all of these uh, parts of the universe, which we cannot access by the way modern science exists right now. Perhaps, hopefully, at some point in time, when somebody develops a kind of a science that is more integrated, that is more evolved, uh, and that opens up the finer sensibilities of the human psyche and mind and consciousness to higher realities, even within this material universe, then that science can help us reach, those platforms. You mentioned Shukadev Goswami and going to the other planets, to the moon, etc. Yeah, these things are there. It's not just the moon; it's all the other higher planets. We have innumerable descriptions all over. But the kind of methodology that was adopted for such travel is of a different league or a different dimension. That kind of transportation cannot happen on the physical platform with this kind of science that we have now. That requires a far more subtler science than what we have at present. So these scientists may be doing their work, and they're doing it in their capacity of what they understand, and in their spiritual capacity, maybe they uh, they will develop that side of it in their spiritual practices.
Thank you, Maharaj, for touching on so many matters. Actually, now we know about what is the Maharaj, what is the view generally of the sadhus on the controversy of the movies and also youth, and also on the important ISRO and NASA satellites launches that we have, because those all these things are connected to the youth actually, because they are the ones who are being affected maximum by it. So thank you, Maharaj, for coming on the show, and we will come up with another show very specific to what Maharaj speaks a lot about, and we will cover that in detail in the next episode. So thank you very much, and Hare Krishna, Jai Jagannath.
Thank you. Hare Krishna, Aditya. Best
Thank you.
wishes.